guys jumping on here and spending some time to try to better yourself in terms of your show lamb projects. So I kind of got to thinking that I know that this is a 3-part series, and for some of you, this might be your first time. You weren't on last week, so I thought it would be good for me to get my computer to work. That's always helpful. There we go. Just to kind of go over my background again, just a little bit. I was no different than all of you in terms of being a 10-year 4-H member, where I showed market lambs all the way through. I also judged livestock in 4-H, and then continued on and judged collegiately at Northeastern Junior College at the University of Wyoming. While at UW, I was the assistant coach there, and then I went on to coach the college team at Eastern Wyoming College for a few years. I also have a little bit of experience of selling and show feed. And then I've been in the extension service for almost 9 years now. So like Kenzie said, we do raise competitive show lambs under Sexton show lambs, my wife and 2 kids. And I try to take advantage of as many opportunities as I can judging market lamb shows across the country. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, just a little bit. So last week, we kind of talked about getting started, how to keep those lambs healthy. We talked about selection in terms of what makes a good lamb, the things that you should probably look for in terms of quality and how one's going to show right and different things. And so this week we're really going to kind of focus on kind of the training, also grooming things, and just some things that I think all of you need to be kind of aware of if you're going to have the market lamb project, and how to make you successful in terms of having that show ring presence and being prepared and ready to go. So again, as we go into grooming, of course, we're going to go back to our slide of getting started with the equipment, okay? So these are all things that you have to have. And when it comes to grooming, you've got to have a trim stand. You've got to have a set of shears, okay? My recommendation to you is to get a blower, because it does absolutely make our jobs a lot easier. And then from there, you've got to make sure that you've got the proper attire in terms of blankets and leg wraps and all those things. And I know that we talked about last week in terms of selecting these lambs, in terms of having leg wool, and it's fine and dandy. We can select those sheep that have leg wool, but we've got to be able to keep it in them, okay? And so we've really got to take care of that leg wool, and we've got to take care of hide and wool things. So we'll talk about that as we move forward. But again, your equipment is really what's going to set you up for success. If you have equipment that's not as easy to use, or it might be old or different things, it can kind of make it hard for us, and to a point that we're not looking forward to actually going out there and shearing lambs or taking care of things. So I got cut short just a little bit last week because I get kind of windy when I get to talking. So I'm just going to kind of jump right into where I wanted to leave off last week, because I think it's important for us to understand that in terms of grooming and different things, we've got to look at some of those things, okay? So in terms of training, okay, we've got to train these sheep before we can ever start getting them sheared and start understanding those parts and different things. So I think it's important for you to give those lambs a good week or so to settle into their new environment. And then I would say that you need to start getting them halter broke real quick. And halter breaking is pretty simple. And I'm going to show you a video here just in a minute. I hope it works. I am not the most technology savvy guy, but I'm getting better as we move forward through all this stuff, Kenzie. So I think in terms of halter breaking, I think it just takes time, okay? Some take to it quicker. Others take a little longer. Some of them will never do it. It really comes down to the individual sheep. I do not want to see any of you guys tying sheep to the four-wheeler or to a tractor or a pickup and dragging them, okay? That is not what we want to do with those sheep. We can spend that time, okay? After about a week, they should be pretty much halter broke. They might balk just a little bit from time to time, but after about a week of just halter breaking and starting to get them familiar with that halter, they should be ready to go. We also want to start ground standing those sheep, and then we want to start bracing and driving. And when I say driving or bracing, they're kind of the two same things, okay? And then it's really important that we get those sheep. A lot of times people will just get them halter broke and not get them broke to lead by the head. And leading by the head is a lot more important than being halter broke, because you can't lead them with the halter into the ring, okay? So I'm going to see if this works. I'm going to show you that this halter breaking stuff is very simple. My 8-year-old daughter, and this is what we do, okay? You got to look out for the little monster, okay? All we are simply doing is just getting them used to the halter. This was the first day, okay? And we were circling around and going all crazy, all right? And within about 30 minutes, we're walking down the road, okay? So it's really quite simple, okay? You just got to spend the time and put the effort into it, okay? Kenzie, are those videos working?
Yes, they're working. They make it a little bit laggy on your audio when you're talking, but they're absolutely working, just a little slow.
Good deal. So really, guys, it's that simple. I mean, the biggest club lamb producers and showmen in the world, that's how they start their halter breaking their club lambs, okay, is just putting a halter on them and rock and roll, and they're going to jump and they're going to fall over and they're going to roll over and they're going to do those things, but they work themselves through that. Let's see if I can. There we go. Okay. So training, it all starts at home, guys. Lambs should be worked at least once a day, twice is better, okay? And as we start to move into the hotter summer months, early in the morning and later in the evening, okay? And as we talk next week about nutrition, we're going to talk about some of those things as well. But I also, excuse me, think it's important that your sheep should stand tied up or on a trim stand for at least 30 minutes a day. Those sheep need to get used to standing still for 30 minutes, because typically that's what a class is at a county or state fair, is about 30, 40 minutes. And that sheep needs to be used to just standing there, okay? If we are putting them on the trim stand, you got to make sure that you got an adult or a caretaker with you in case the sheep does decide to try to fall off that stand, okay? I'm a little bit more, I'm a little biased and I'm a little more partial to the sheep deal, but I truly feel that training a sheep is one of the hardest species to do that with, all right? I think it's one of the hardest species to show, because we're not only training the sheep how to do this, but we're also training ourselves how to do this. And your muscles might not be ready to go, all right? You've got to work yourself out the same way that we're working those sheep out. So I tell a lot of people when I'm judging showmanship and different things, that if we're going to expect a sheep to come out to a county fair class and stand there and brace as hard as they can for 30 or 45 minutes, and they're not trained to do that, there's no way they're going to get that done. And I kind of challenge people to think about, can you do that? Flex your arm for as hard as you can for 30 or 45 minutes and see if you can do that. If you just jump into it, it's not going to happen. You're going to get tired and you're going to give up. But if you do it for 5 minutes a couple of days a week, and then you work into 10 minutes and 15, and as you gradually go, you can train yourself to do that. So we've got to keep that same mindset in terms of training these sheep, okay? It's also very important that someone is there while you're working your sheep to handle those lambs, okay? When I'm judging a show and I walk up to handle that sheep and he lunges forward, that tells me two things: that sheep is not used to being handled by someone else, or using a hot shot to get him to brace, okay? Do not use a hot shot. That's the worst thing you can use with these sheep, because every time somebody walks up to them to handle them, as in the judge or whatever, that sheep thinks he's going to get shocked, and his first instinct is to jump away from that, okay? And we'll talk about some of these things of how we can train these sheep to brace, all right? Okay, daily care, you have got to spend time with your project. That's just all there is to it, okay? You've got to tame them down, and the biggest thing you've got to do is you've got to build trust with that lamb, okay? They've got to trust you. You've got to be that safety net for them, that when you take them to a different county fairgrounds or a jackpot show or wherever it is, you're the familiar thing for them, okay? You've got to daily train those sheep, and then we've got to exercise and get into those showing things. All right, so these are some things that we'll talk about as we get into grooming. um, Here's a couple of examples of how to get one to brace. Okay, I'm pretty old school. Most of the time, if you buy your lambs from someone that is raising show lambs, they're probably trained to brace before you get them. Okay, because those producers are constantly setting them up and looking at them and showing them off and different things. All right. Um, you can see at the top here, this is this big old contraption that's made to train these sheep how to brace and keep their head up and elevated and different things. Okay, something like that, I'm guessing costs a couple $1,000s. All right, do you have to have that? No, you do not have to have that. Can you go buy it? Get her done. Okay, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But I simply just dig a 3-foot hole in the ground, a square hole, and you can see in terms of my diagram here, all right, on each day you set them up on a different side of that hole, and that creates that sheep to not know where the hole is because it's in a different spot every day. Okay, but it's also important for you to get that hole covered up so that the dog or little brother or whatever it is doesn't fall off in there. Okay, and know where that's at. But it works very easy just to push them off in there. It's safe. It's not going to hurt them. Okay. I think it's important for you to change up where you practice. You can always use your shear stand, but make sure you've got an adult there with you as you do that. Okay. You can use the back of a stock trailer. Okay. Don't use a flatbed trailer that's 4 foot off the ground. Okay. Use a low profile stock trailer that might be 6-8 inches off the ground. Okay. So you just got to trade it up. All right. But it's really important that as we start to train these lambs that we've always got an adult present. Okay. So in terms of grooming and all these things, I think it's really important that we understand that we've got to tie the grooming in with exercise, nutrition, as well as showing. Okay. Because all of those things promote our grooming and the job that we're doing. All right. If we're not feeding properly, we're probably not going to be able to groom real well. And if we're not exercising properly, we're not going to be able to groom anything to show it off. Right. So it really all kind of mixes in together. So I get asked a lot in terms of how to exercise lambs. Okay. And why do we exercise lambs? So it's no different than us. All right. If we are active and we are exercising, it promotes health. We can build muscle. It keeps our appetite up. Okay. When you go outside and you work all day, you come into the house that night, you're hungry, you're ready to eat because your body has used energy in order to work or exercise, right? So these are all important things as we feed these lambs, and we'll kind of dip into this next week as well. There's all kinds of methods to exercising. Okay, you can simply walk them down the county road, or you can do intense exercise methods. Okay, whatever you choose is up to you, whatever you can do. All right, if you choose more intense methods, you need to know what you're doing, and adults should be present. Okay, but I think it's important as we exercise these sheep that we understand that we want short, intense exercise. All right, just walking them 5 miles down the road and back isn't going to do anything for them. And I want you guys to think about it in terms of gymnasts. All right, gymnasts are kind of shorter but really stout people, right? Because they're used to very short, quick bursts of exercise. If we think about the marathon runner, they're very tall, they're very slender. Okay, but we want our sheep to be like gymnasts, so we want to utilize short, intense exercise. All right, so just keep that in mind as we go through. So I've got some pictures here of some different options in terms of exercise. Anybody can probably do this right here, right? Get them on a halter and walk them down the county road. Okay, that's perfect. Okay, but just walking them isn't going to be building that muscle, so we've got to run them a little bit. Okay, um, you know, when I was a kid, we used to walk them down the road and then we'd turn them loose and they'd run all the way back to the house. Okay, and those are that's great. That's what we utilized. All right, but you got to make sure there's no cars coming and dogs and all those things. Okay. Um, but you've got to still get some type of intense, quick exercise in those sheep. But we need to do this anyways. This help promote health and appetite as well. All right. So here's an example of a treadmill. You know, one of these treadmills is probably upwards of $3,500. You can walk those sheep forwards on their back legs. You can walk those sheep backwards on their back legs. All right. You can tie them to it. Now, what's important is you can't just throw a sheep in here and expect them to just go to walking on the treadmill. You have to train those sheep to do that. Okay. So it's going to take a couple weeks for you to train them how to walk on it to where they don't think that this thing's trying to eat them. Right. So there's some time there. And as we get into these methods, this is where I'm talking about is you really got to know what you're doing. Okay. Is this an option? Absolutely. You can do this. You know, there's thousands of people out there that use these treadmills to walk these lambs and get them exercised. A lot of you might have some horse background. Okay. You can see this in the horse world all day long. It's the same way for sheep. All right. You can use one of these and that just constantly keeps them going. All right. A lot of folks will use these for horses to get them cooled down or kind of get them warmed up a little bit before they do go out to do hard exercise. This might be an option before you do go out and do your short, intense exercise. All right. This is a track. Okay. I think there's a lot of folks out there that utilize a track and a dog. This is probably my least encouraged way to exercise, because if you do not know what you're doing and you do not have a good dog, you're going to get in a wreck. Okay. You really are. So you've really got to know what you're doing in this circumstance. But all they're doing here is they're putting a dog behind those sheep. All right. And they're running them really fast around there 2 or 3 times. And then they're going to take them out. All right. But you've really got to have a really good setup and know what you're doing in this circumstance. Okay. Are there any questions in terms of exercise or anything like that?
We don't have anything in the chat yet, so if you guys have a question, feel free to unmute and ask it now.
So my lamb is like 3 weeks old or something.
Okay.
He's not gonna be sold at Adams County Fair because he's still small. But how should I go about halter breaking with him? Should I wait a few weeks until he's bigger and will fit in the halter?
Yeah. So he's still with mom, right?
Yeah, he hasn't even been weaned.
I wouldn't worry about halter breaking until at least until you wean him from mom. Okay.
Okay.
I recommend that you wean him at 60 days old. All right.
Yeah.
Not any longer and not any sooner. Right at day 60, get him weaned, and then you can start doing your halter breaking and stuff.
Okay.
Good question.
You do have a question in the chat. Where are the best places to find a treadmill?
Oh, your best bet is just get on to like the Clubland Breeders pages, Champion Drive, different things like that. Those equipment companies are on there. There's multiple different manufacturers of those. I think probably the most popular is Ty Allen, builds those treadmills. He's got them posted on his website. I've actually seen people just take a human treadmill and build a box for it that goes around it, and then they can put those lambs or whatever on there. So you can use a human one too, you know, so that's a possibility.
So I have a question. So I have a lamb at home, and when you walk him, he kind of like ducks his like front end down, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yep.
So how do you start to train them to lift their front end up and their head so they're not just ducking the whole time?
Well, the first thing that I would probably want to do is I'd want to see how the sheep is made structurally in terms of is there a structure issue that prevents him from lifting his head? And maybe he's a little straight in his shoulder or different things. If that's not the case, the best way is just to tie them up high to the fence while you're standing there with them and keeping them calm, all right? And that'll train them to keep their head elevated. And if we look in this picture back here, you can see kind of how that sheep in that bracing stand there has got his head kind of elevated, okay? And I would start at different levels. I would start lower for a few days and then work it up a little higher and then work it up a little higher, okay? But we don't want to just hang them from the fence or from that contraption or whatever it is, right? So wherever it's comfortable where you think that sheep's going to be shown at, that's where you want to try to get them tied to start training those things, okay? Some sheep are just like that. They're kind of stubborn and they fight it. They want to balk at it just a little bit. It's just going to take that time to train them. Your shear stand will also help you with that, putting them on that shear stand and getting it elevated just a little bit to train their head and their neck to do that. So does that answer that?
Yes, thank you so much.
You bet.
All right, JD, there are a couple more questions in the chat. A couple of them aren't necessarily exercise related, so if you're okay, I'll keep those till the end. But there is one that somebody's saying their lamb likes to sit. When I try setting her up, what can I do to make her stop?
Probably your best bet is you're just going to have to kind of keep going with it. When you got to pay attention to that if you are setting them up, that you're setting them up in between your legs and not utilizing your knee. Sometimes when we use our knee, we'll push on those sheep esophagus and they kind of run low of air just a little bit, and their first instinct is to get away from that. So make sure that you're utilizing what I like to call the V of our legs, all right, using both of your thighs to push into that sheep rather than one knee, okay? And that keeps that esophagus open, and that might be what you're running into a little bit. Or you might just be running into that she's kind of a butthead and just kind of figured out to lay down on you. So it's probably just going to take some time to work through that.
All right, I think we've got, the rest is kind of nutrition questions. So if you want to carry on, and then we'll maybe address those next week or at the end if we've got time.
Perfect, that sounds good. So we'll jump into this grooming thing. All right, and again, I'm just going to put my disclaimer out there. These are just my recommendations. All right, there's a million different ways to do these things. Everybody's kind of got their own niche. All right. Typically, we talked about not shearing those sheep till the first part of May. And then after that, I like to keep those sheep shorn about every 3 to 4 weeks, depending on whether you're taking them to a show or different things. Okay. Of course, if you're jackpotting them pretty hard, they're going to be pretty fine shorn throughout the summer. But I also like to try to, if I'm not taking a sheep to a show, I also like to try to shear them dry, not use too much soap because I don't want to get that natural lanolin out of them. All right, so I'll use a little coarser comb, which you got to know what you're doing in that circumstance, and we'll talk about why we want to try to keep that lanolin in them here shortly. For show, the sheep have got to be shorn very tightly or close. All right. I prefer a 24-tooth Lister comb, either a fine or surgical blade, okay? With the fines, you can shear the day before or the day of the show. With surgicals, I like those a couple of days before. It's also going to depend on the type of hide that your sheep has. If he's got kind of a swirly pattern to his wool, you might need to utilize a surgical blade to help get that out so that we have a nice, smooth appearance to that fleece. Okay, you need to keep that wool and that hide cared for to keep it soft and fresh. Many of those products out there, there's a ton of stuff, and do they work? I don't know. I mean, every company's got a different one. I think it really just comes down to some trial and error for yourselves and see what works. But keep in mind that sheep have a natural barrier, and that's lanolin. Okay, that's their natural barrier. That's what keeps their hide fresh. That's what keeps their wool fresh. So every time you wash that sheep, you're taking that lanolin out. So That's their natural protector to this wool fungus and ringworm, and we're going to talk about that here shortly. Leg wool, we talked about it being a current fad in the show ring, but we've got to take care of that leg wool in order to keep that leg wool and keep it clean, okay? A lot of people ask me, do the leg wool promoters in terms of supplements and different things work? Again, I don't know. I think you can do more with just keeping leg wraps on those sheep, keeping that hair worked. It's no different than working cattle hair. We're going to wash and we're going to rinse those legs out to promote that, keep it clean, keep it conditioned and hydrated, and that leg wool should stay there, okay? The other reason that we want to try to keep those leg wraps on those sheep, because sometimes sheep will wool pick, and they'll actually pick that wool out from those other lambs' legs. And depending on the genetics of that sheep, they can do what we call shucking their wool. And at some point, that leg wool just starts falling out. But if we start taking care of it, it should stay there through the duration of the show season, okay? So again, overwashing can encourage fungus and ringworm, and you need to make sure that you're sanitizing your equipment and the sheep after shows, weigh-ins, and jackpots, okay? So here's just some things, all right? Those are an example of the leg wraps there on the left. You need to get a nice card, but it's extremely important to understand that you don't just card those legs to death, because every time you card that, you're pulling wool out, okay? You just want to kind of fluff it up and keep it out. You don't want to be actually pulling that wool out of those legs, okay? Using a blower to keep those legs clean and free of any debris and dirt and vegetable matter is really important, okay? Myself personally, I prefer a canvas blanket versus the socks or the tubes, because it covers more of the sheep's body, okay? And that prevents that sheep being exposed to fungus and ringworm on pin panels, you know, scales, different things like that, okay? So I talked about the two different blades. The one on top is what we consider a 24-tooth lister comb. All right, that's the type of comb that you need to use to get ready for a show. All right, the blade on the bottom, that is not going to get those sheep close enough for a show. All right, that's the type of blade that I use when I'm just dry shearing those sheep, because it will go through them without having to. But I will tell you right now, if you are not an experienced shearer, do not use the bottom blade, okay? That's what we call a 13-tooth Wyoming rake. And that thing, it's big enough to get your finger in, all right? And if you get your finger in there, you're not going to get your finger back. So you've really got to be experienced shearer before you start shearing with a 13-tooth comb, all right? I've provided a couple videos here, and I think that all I'm going to do here is I'm just going to provide these links to you, okay? We could watch these videos, but they're going to take a little bit of time. They're from Weaver Leather, okay? And Chad Charmason does these videos, and I'm not promoting Weaver Leather or the Weaver show products, but they're really good videos for kids to watch in terms of how to take care of leg wool and how to get one shorn properly and how to start. So you'll have that link. You guys can just do that YouTube link on your own, okay, and watch it. They're like 5-6 minutes a piece, okay? So you don't have to sit there for days, but they're just a really good instructional video to kind of give you guys an idea of where to start and how to do it properly, okay? All right, so the hide and wool care, okay, I think a lot of times I think people get really confused with this, all right? My recommendation is that after you shear those sheep for the first time, you need to keep the blankets on them, okay? You need to keep a canvas blanket on them at all times. The main reason is that it helps prevent exposure to fungus as well as keep sheep's natural lanolin contained within their wool, okay? It also helps with fly control in the summer, all right, or any other pests, mosquitoes, different things like that, all right? It's just less body surface that's exposed for them to be getting bit and different things. But it is important for you to take the blankets off every day and check for fungus, sores, wounds, maybe some fly strike, whatever it is, all right? If you just put that blanket on and you don't check it for 30 days and he bumped into the fence or ran into the feeder and he's got a wound and you're not taking care of it and seeing it because you're not taking that blanket off, you need to make sure you take it off every day. Okay. The other thing is too, is sometimes those lambs will have some digestive issues where they'll get a little loose in their stool. And if you're not cleaning that out, that can just keep building up and you're not paying attention to those things and it's just not healthy. Okay. If you do have a ewe lamb, make sure you get one of those blankets that have the mesh butt in it. All right. So those females can urinate out of those. All right. So another thing that I think I've seen a bunch of wrecks with, all right, is people trying to keep sheep cool in the summer to encourage eating and different things. And they'll use swamp coolers. Do not use swamp coolers. All right. That damp, cool temp just flares up fungus and ringworm and really encourages it. Okay. If you've got a show barn type situation or an insulated room, you can put a regular air conditioner in there to help keep things monitored. All right. But it's also important for you to understand that if you keep your show barn or your barn at 65 degrees, all right, all summer long, and then you take them lambs down to the county fair on August 10th and it's 105 degrees, them sheep are not going to be ready for it. All right. I think it's really important for us to understand those sheep are tough. Okay. They're designed to be able to handle heat. That's why their body temperature is higher than yours and mine. They can handle hotter temperatures. Okay. But it's still, we want to keep them comfortable. That's why a fan and different things is really what I encourage you to use rather than air conditioners or whatever it is. A good fan will go a long ways. All right. Just to keep the air moving and keep them cooled off. The hide and wool conditioners can be used to keep the hide healthy and that wool white. All right. You're just going to have to kind of see what works best for you. All right. There's a lot of different products out there. Am I going to say one's better than the other? No. I think, all of the show supply companies all have a really good shampoo and conditioner for sheep, whether it's Sullivan's or Weaver or whatever it is. Okay. There's a lot of good products out there. So don't fall into too many fads. All right. Just find something that's affordable to get those sheep washed out. Okay. So this is about the best picture that I can provide to show you an example of what show fungus looks like. Okay. And this is at probably about the mid stage of fungus. All right. You've got to check these sheep for fungus. All right. Most of the time I will tell most of our sheep people that it's not if you get show fungus, it's when you get show fungus. All right. Particularly if you are not managing it and checking for it and taking care of your precautions of it. Okay. Inevitably, and I know Kenzie can probably say the same thing, they get a phone call the week before county fair and says, my sheep's got show fungus. What do I do? Don't bring him. All right. You can't bring those sheep to most of the fairs if that fungus is viable and living. All right. Now, if that fungus is falling out and we're starting to get some hair and some wool growing back into it, it's going to be up to your vet at your county fair on whether they're going to let that one in or not. Okay. But this is a prime example of what show fungus looks like. Okay. I had a really good friend of mine, bought some lambs from us last year. I dropped by the place 2 weeks before fair. He pulled the blankets off and my heart just sunk because they were covered in fungus. Okay. So they didn't get to show those sheep at their county fair. It was heartbreaking. Okay. And for all of you kids that put all that time and effort and work into it, you don't want to be seeing that the week before county fair. All right. So some fungus prevention. All right. My recommendation to all of you, Clorox is your friend. Okay. And if you're a younger 4-H or FFA member, make sure mom and dad or whoever, an adult, is helping you with this. Okay. But you've got to clean all of your show equipment, your trailers, your clothes, all of those things. You've got to keep biosecurity in mind because this fungus is contagious stuff. All right. If you borrow your clippers out to a friend, do not shear your sheep until you know you've sanitized and Clorox those things up. All right. There are some fungus shampoos out there. They do work. Okay. It's just an antifungal that every time you get home, you wash that sheep in that antifungal shampoo. Okay. You got to do it. It just absolutely is a must. So it's really important that prevention is key, okay? If you do get fungus, I'm going to tell you right now, you just got to call your vet and visit with them, all right? They're going to have to work with you to get that stuff cleared up, okay? But prevention, okay? All right, some other things that I think that we kind of forget about sometimes is some of the biosecurity things when we are, doing our grooming and going to these jackpots and these camps and different things, okay? I know it sounds crazy, but you really need to keep biosecurity on your own place and your own equipment from family and friends, okay? You need to have show clothes and you need to have barn clothes. If you come back from a jackpot, do not go into your barn with the clothes that you wore at that jackpot. Go into the house, put them in the washing machine, put your clothes in your dresser or your barn clothes back on before you go out, and particularly your shoes, okay? You've got to sanitize and clean all of your equipment, your trim stands, your blower hose, the blower, your cards, everything, okay? You've got to really keep those things clean. And I know that I probably sound like I'm on a soapbox here, but I'm telling you guys, the show fungus stuff is not fun, all right? And if you do your job taking care of it, you won't have to worry about it, okay? So it's important. Did you sanitize your barn and different things before you got your animals this year? And I know that a lot of us probably haven't had those sheep out, but if things do open up and we do get some opportunities to maybe go to a jackpot show, you've got to make sure that you're keeping things clean, okay? Speak to your vet about some of those sanitation things, of what products work the best, all right, and some of those methods. The other thing that I will tell you is, I know it's hard, but when we've got buddies that are showing sheep, or whatever livestock species it is, got a buddy that comes over for the weekend, man, come check out my sheep, but he's got sheep too, and he's wearing the same shoes that he wears in his barn. You are encouraging to bring any issues into that place. So if it's sore mouth or fungus or anything else like that, you just got to keep those things in mind, all right? Because it'll be a lot easier for you just to say, hey, let's go throw another pair of shoes on before we go out to the barn, or let's think about cleaning these things before we go out, okay? All right, so that's kind of the big take-home message of grooming and different things. We could start these. What do we got, Kenzie? About 10 minutes?
Yep, we got about 10 minutes, and we do have a couple questions in the chat when you'd like to take those as well.
Questions. I think we can watch those videos on our own at any point, so let's do the questions.
Okay. All right. So one of them is, how often should we wash?
I would only wash if you're going to a show, okay? So if you're going to a jackpot show, then wash. If you're not going to go anywhere all summer, you're just going to, those sheep are not going to leave, then you can wash them and shear them, all right? But I would only wash if we're going for competition, okay? But if you're not going to go anywhere, those sheep, the only place they're going is county fair, you can wash them a couple of times to get them sheared off throughout the summer. That won't be a problem, okay? As long as you're not getting exposed to some of those things.
Great. The next one is, when do we use leg wraps?
All the time. So realistically, as soon as we've kind of talked about this last week. Most of us have probably got our sheep at home. Our weigh-ins were supposed to be coming up here pretty quick, okay? Here's the thing is, I think a prime example is if we look at the screen right here, okay? We've got two sheep that are being shorn. The sheep on the left that the young lady is shearing has got a little bit of leg wool, okay? If we don't take care of that, it's all going to fall out. The sheep on the right, that sheep doesn't have any leg wool, okay? If he doesn't have leg wool, putting leg wraps on him isn't going to grow wool, all right? They've got to be born with it, is really what it comes down to. Now, the sheep on the left that the young lady is shearing, if we do put leg wraps on, as soon as we get those sheep home and we start rocking and rolling, we can probably maintain the leg wool that sheep does have. But I will tell you, just to be honest with you, When it comes down to it, the sheep on the left does not have enough leg wool in terms of where we're at today. Okay, these sheep are getting crazy leg wool. All right, to the point that these producers are specifically buying rams that really the only thing they got going for them is just leg wool to start working this into the genetics. Okay, so but I would put those leg wraps on as soon as you can, especially if they've got really good leg wool on them, so that you can hold that leg wool as long as you can.
Great, thank you. The next one is regarding leg wool again. As a judge, which do you prefer, the leg hair fluffed outward, or do you prefer for the leg hair to fluff down?
I want to see it blended, and I'm glad you asked that question, because I think not only for myself but for the majority of lamb judges across the country, one of their biggest pet peeves is wool above the knee on the front leg and wool above the hock on the rear leg. Okay, you've got to blend that wool in, and I want to see it uniform. Okay, I don't want to, I mean, if you got a big old boot and you've got it pulled up, you still got to shape it and form it. Okay, and that video will show you that I've provided there in terms of blending that forearm into that leg wool down through the knee, as well as blending that wool from the hock down into the leg. All right, but I don't like to see just big old poofy wool. All right, I want to see it shaped and formed where each leg looks the same. And I think that's probably one of the bigger challenges that a lot of our members have, is the rear legs, one doesn't look the same as the other. We took too much off of one. All right, and I will tell you, you've really got to be careful, because they're still an animal, right? And the minute you go in there with a set of clippers and he jumps forward and you go, and you're like, oh shoot. Okay, we just took all the leg wool off that we've been working on all summer long. So I prefer it to see it formed and blended in, and not just big poofy stuff. Okay, I think that's part of showmanship, particularly in the sheep thing that we're dealing with right now, is those kids that are taking that time to work that leg wool through the summer and also get it to blend and look really natural in the show ring.
Great. The next question, they had a question earlier about a lamb that doesn't sound like it's quite thriving as well as some of their others, and it might be a good question for next month. But this question is, that same lamb doesn't have much wool, but her wool condition is a little off. She's growing wool, but is also not growing wool in certain places, and they're wondering why.
I guess the first question, if you're seeing some wool issues, I would ask if that sheep came from the same, is that person online here that asked that question?
Yep, I believe so. Kylie, if you're able to hop on and unmute.
Yeah.
Okay, so is the sheep that's got the wool issues, did it come from the same place as the other ones?
Yeah. She's one of my own.
One that you raised?
Yeah. She came from one of my breeding ewes.
Okay,
She
so
had a twin brother.
it might be, are you feeding all three of those sheep together?
Yeah.
Okay, and that sheep's just not gaining and doing as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm guessing the other two are pushing that sheep out, and we might be dealing with a little bit of a mineral imbalance or a mineral deficiency. My recommendation to you is to start hand feeding those sheep, so that you know that each one is getting the amount of feed that they need. Okay, and we'll talk about this more in detail next week, but always keep in mind 2% of that sheep's body weight is what they should be getting in grain. Okay, I think it's probably time to get them separated and make sure that they're getting the nutrition in the grain that they're supposed to, as well as if you are seeing some wool and different things falling out, you might check to see when the last time was that you wormed. You might be dealing with a lice issue. So there's multiple things there. So if you've got some good weather coming, it might not hurt to get that one sheared off so that you can get down in there and see what's going on, that it's not a parasite issue. and then it's probably time to get them separated and make sure that that individual's getting the groceries they need to.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, JD. The next one, Zion might have to give us a little background on this, but the question is, when should the sheep lose their black colors?
Their black colors. So some sheep, I mean, most lambs are born with kind of a darker black wool. Okay. My little girl took a lamb to the online show and tell just the other day, and her teacher was just amazed that it was a black lamb. And you know, we had to visit with the teacher about, well, they're all kind of born that way. Okay. So depending on that age, it'll eventually start to lighten up. After you shear them that first time, most of the time that wool will go white. Now, if they have what we call kind of a natural colored gene, where we actually have sheep that have black fleeces, all right, or they'll have a blue fleece, that'll never go away. Okay, so it really comes down to the genetics of that sheep. So I'm guessing he's probably still got his baby wool on him, and once you shear him off, you're going to be like, "Oh, I didn't know he was that bright and white." Okay, but you might shear him off, you might get a black spot, or part of his fleece is got a bluer, darker color to it. It's always the first time you shear them off, it's always kind of like unwrapping a present. You're not real sure what colors are going to be underneath there.
Great. So the next one is, do you shear them when they're wet or when they're dry?
Well, it depends on the type of shears that you're using. Okay. If you're going to use those 24 tooth lister blades, they need to be a little wet, not just dripping wet, but they need to be washed, and they need to have been wet at some point. Okay, through that washing period, get them dried off. If you're using the older Oster type shears with maybe a 22 tooth comb, or even resorting to the 13 tooth comb, you can shear those sheep dry with those type of blades. One thing that I do, I will use my Oster shears with a 22 tooth comb that is a little finer comb without washing the sheep. And what I do is I just get a bucket of water, sudsy water with soap in it. You got to be really careful of what you're doing. Okay, I don't want to hear anybody get electrocuted. All right. But what you do is you just dip the blades while it's running in that water, and that soap will break up that lanolin on that. You take it out, spray your lube, your WD-40, whatever it is, your oil back on it, and you go to shearing. But I'm telling you right now, you need to make sure an adult is helping with that if you do that. That's kind of an old trick that you can use, that you don't have to wash the sheep, and just good Dawn dish soap will take that lanolin and that grease off those blades for you to keep going through it.
All right, I got two more questions for you, and then I think we're going to have to skip off and get goats rolling here in a little bit.
Okay.
One is, well, I guess there's two regarding leg wraps. Somebody's asking what age on the leg wraps. I'm assuming they're producing their own lambs. And then somebody was asking if you have a type of leg wrap that you would recommend over another.
You know, I think probably the most common one that you are seeing is from either Sullivan's or Weaver. I see a lot of homemade leg wraps that, you know, mom or grandma's like, heck, I can make that a lot cheaper than what we can buy it from Weaver or Sullivan's. And I'm not trying to run those companies down, but a lot of us have got some family in our lives that are pretty resourceful and can build some things like that. So, you know, I think the biggest challenge is keeping those leg wraps on. Even the real expensive ones from these show supply companies, that's still a challenge of keeping them on. But I would say, you know, after the first time you shear that sheep, that's when those leg wraps need to go on. Okay. And if we're encouraging you to start shearing those lambs off the first part of May here, that's when I'd probably start putting those leg wraps on. But if you do start seeing sheep, you know, kind of picking at that leg wool and different things, you can always put those leg wraps on. But I mean, they make them where they're like scrunchies at the top and the bottom, and they've got little drawstrings on them, or most of the ones that like from Sullivan's and Weaver, they're like a horse leg wrap. If you're familiar with a horse leg wrap, it just wraps around and it's got a Velcro that sticks to itself. Those seem to work pretty good.
All right. And then the very last one for you, somebody is, they keep popping in, is how far should you walk or sprint per day? They do theirs about 2 miles a day.
Yeah, I mean, I think the probably the important thing that we should have talked about with exercise is it's going to depend on what the lamb needs. Okay. You know, right now, if that lamb is weighing 75 pounds and you're exercising 2 miles a day, all you're doing is burning off all of his gain every day. Okay. So the amount of fat that that individual has, the amount of muscle that he naturally has, that exercise is going to dictate. You know, some sheep might need more exercise to keep them trimmer. Some sheep might not need as much because genetically they're just a trimmer made lamb that's more expressive. So it's really going to just dictate on the type of body that that sheep has. Okay. If you guys could see me from the belly down, you guys would be like, okay, JD, you need a lot of exercise. Okay. If you could see Kenzie, you'd be like, okay, Kenzie, quit working out because you're wasting away to nothing. Okay. So it really comes down to what that individual sheep is okay. So to say that you need to walk a certain amount every day and a certain duration of time, I don't think I can answer that probably. I don't think that'd be fair for you because I think we could either get you into trouble of taking too much weight off, or we could get you into trouble of not putting enough weight on or muscles. So, you know, visit with your producers, keeping a kind of in mind just the type of body and frame that that sheep has.
All right, thanks, JD. If you've got 20 seconds on this one, someone's got a lamb that bumps and jumps his head up and down when they're walking by hand and leading him by the head, and their
Yep.
8-year-old's having a hard time. Any tips on that, keeping him held?
I will tell you right now that, you know, I've got an 8-year-old that she's got to wait a year here to show because the way her birthday fell. But I'm a very firm believer that when they're 8, 9, 10 years old, we have got to train the sheep to show the kid. Okay. And I don't know if that necessarily makes sense to a lot of us, but mom and dad are going to have to spend some time getting that one to show the kid off. All right. Because those kids just aren't tough enough and got enough, you know, lead to lift that head and keep those things going. Okay. I think it's important that just time is going to get you through that. And I think if you can get a little firmer grip, if mom or dad or an adult can hold that head a little bit more to where you're walking them around and they figure out that, you know, I think a lot of times those sheep figure out with those little guys that I can get away with a lot more. Okay. So it's just going to take some time and we're going to lose them and they're going to get loose. And that's just the way it is. But, and some of them, I mean, again, I think a lot of times we forget we are dealing with livestock. It's not always going to be perfect. You know, got a really good friend that's very competitive. They had a sheep last year at the Colorado State Fair, and he's like, this guy is just a spaz. He's like, I've never seen one wired like him. He's afraid of everything. And I mean, she's 19-year-old girl and is afraid she's going to lose this sheep just because he's just wired different. And that's just livestock. That's the way it is. So.
All right, thanks, JD. Well, we did have another question come in, but unfortunately we got to pop off and get goats rolling. So like I said, JD's wonderful enough to let us, I will be emailing out the PDF version of these slides so you guys can check out those links on those videos. And then make sure to join us next week at 4 o'clock and we will be, or JD will be going over nutrition. So thank you very much, JD. We really appreciate you being on. And I'm going to pop you guys all off and get goats started here.
Thanks, Kenzie.
Thanks, JD.